Let's compare every single crawler crane ever made. In the past 4 decades, there have been a total of 4, from 2006, 2012, 2015, and 2023. For this comparison, the 2019 version is excluded since it's far different from the rest. Each crane will be tested in 4 categories: the functionality, authenticity, playability, as well as value. A crane can earn a maximum of 5 points per category, and the winner will be the one with most points. Let's begin with the LEGO Technic crawler crane of 2006 set number 8288. Of course, you can roll the crane as well as rotate it a full 360 degrees. There is nothing connecting the chassis to the superstructure besides the turntable, so it is a very simple functionality. There are 3 crankshafts that you can rotate, and each one uses a ratchet mechanism. The right one is responsible for raising and lowering the hook. The middle knob adjusts the rear boom as well as the red beams, while the leftmost one controls the front boom, and notice how the string is connected to a block which is attached via cables to the boom. This seems a lot like the mini version of the Liber crane. Despite being so small, it packs a ton of functionality and string-based mechanisms. Furthermore, it uses counterweight bricks which actually have metal on the inside and are much heavier for their size in comparison to the plastic counterweights we got in the recently released massive crane. As a result, I give it 4 points for functionality. The playability seems great, but the tracks do have a tendency to snap, so I can only give it 3.5 points. This is an unlicensed crane, so instead of it being based on a real-life model, it is instead a generic crane, which means it has a lot of flexibility in terms of its looks. It resembles the real-life Liber LR13000, and its small size allows it to have proper proportions. So, for the authenticity, I give it 5 points. This set has impeccable value. When it was released in 2006, it retailed for $50. Adjusted for inflation, that is around $76, so it would probably retail for $80, putting it in the same price range as the Ducati Panigale motorcycle. This set contains exactly 800 pieces, so each piece costs about 10 cents. The Ducati Panigale motorcycle has 646 pieces, which is a lot less, but it does have a 2-speed transmission, while the crawler crane has interesting string mechanisms. Personally, I believe that the crane is more valuable, so I give it 5 points for value, bringing us to a total of 17.5 points. Isn't looking at old sets fascinating? In the very next video, we will be ranking every single 2023 LEGO Technic set, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. None of the cranes in this comparison have any pneumatic cylinders, which means that there is no pressure to subscribe. Next up is the tracked crane set number 9391 from 2012. It has rotation of the superstructure via a control knob, boom elevation by using a worm gear connected to an 8-tooth gear which connects to several beams. Of course, there is also boom extension, making this the only Technic crawler crane with such a functionality. For the functions, I give it 4 points, and the playability gets 5 points. It's a tiny crane, and for what it is, it has good authenticity, so that gets 4 points. It retailed for $20 while containing 218 pieces. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $26. It's still a nice and cheap way to get a crawler crane, but it's a little overpriced, so I can only give it 4 points for its value, which gives us a total of 17 points. Next up is the LEGO Technic crawler crane set number 42042 from 2015, which is considered by most fans to be the perfect crawler crane. It introduced a multi-directional gearbox for the first time in the history of LEGO Technic. This gave way into a plethora of advanced sets such as the bucket wheel excavator, the Bell Boeing V22 Osprey, and so many more. It came with the battery box as well as the power functions L motor to power the gearbox, which controlled 4 functions: the driving of the tracks, superstructure rotation, boom elevation, as well as claw elevation. My complaint about this crane is that the multi-directional gearbox could have easily been expanded to have 2 switches for the tracks as opposed to 1, so that the tracks could be controlled independently. In this crawler crane, the 2 tracks are mechanically linked. There are also several manual functions, such as opening the claw as well as raising and lowering the cabin. The functions easily get a perfect score of 5 points. But what about the playability? Well, in the default configuration, there is a clutch gear, which prevents the crane from lifting anything even slightly heavy, which is why I replaced it with a standard 24-tooth gear. Even though this is clearly a downside in terms of playability, it has a phenomenal redeeming quality, which is its ease of motorization. All you have to do is take out the gearbox, place a motor for each axle except for the driving one, then place 2 motors for the 2 tracks and add a motor for the claw. There are 2 motors on the claw because one of them serves as a counterweight. Optionally, you can add lights, which I did in my mod. Keep in mind that this modification was done over 7 years ago, so I could have done a much better job modifying it today. Because of how fun it is to play with, as well as the possibility to easily give it a full RC mod, I give it a perfect score of 5 points for playability. It's an unlicensed, generic crane, and it looks pretty good, but the battery box is exposed, so I give it 4 points for authenticity. The value of this crane is pretty good. In 2015, it retailed for only $150, which is around $195 adjusted for inflation. It included 1401 pieces and contained power functions, even though it's nearly $200, which is certainly expensive, and it's about 600 pieces short of having an ideal price to parts ratio. I still believe that it has a decent value. However, the Airbus H-175 rescue helicopter still has far greater value, containing 2001 pieces, retailing for $210, which is a little more expensive than the crane, but it also has the much more expensive battery box and L motor. As a result, I can only give this crane 4 points for value, which brings us to a total of 18 points. I would also like to briefly showcase a model I was astonished by. Take a look at this gorgeous golf cart. I truly believe that this is the single greatest LEGO Ideas project of all time, so go and vote for this project. Let's get it to 10,000 followers. Now, the moment you have been waiting for. Let's look at the LEGO Technic Liber Crawler Crane LR13000, set number 4146, released on August 1st of 2023. This set is truly incredible. It blew my mind as I was building it. It has 6 large angular motors, 2 for the tracks, 1 for rotating the superstructure, 1 for boom elevation of the bottom half, another for the second half, and the final motor is for raising and lowering the hook. The way all of these pulleys and blocks work together to make it move is fascinating, and what's even more fascinating is that the string spools are just directly connected to the respective motor. There are no gears involved here, and yet the spools never want to unwind no matter how much pressure the hook is under. The superstructure rotation mechanism uses a lot of gears to ensure smooth operation, and the tracks even get planetary wheel hubs on top of gears for maximum torque. The functionality easily gets a perfect score of 5 points. The playability itself is fantastic. The crane can lift a surprising amount of weight, and as long as you add some extra counterweights on the back, you can lift so much more than you'd expect. Just remember not to hold it by its tracks when it's holding a lot of weight, because this is what will happen to you. It's not a fun experience. I don't like that there's support structure under the counterweights. It seems like a last-minute solution, and they're not really necessary. However, what makes up for that is the weight detection function. By using the internal gyroscope of the hub, it can detect the amount of load being applied to the crane, because as it carries something heavy, the hub in the superstructure itself will tilt. A fun challenge would be to make a program that displays the actual weight being applied in grams or ounces. Another problem with the playability is that sometimes during turning, the tracks can snap off, which can be a little annoying. However, I believe that the fascinating mechanisms and its ability to lift so much weight certainly outweigh the negatives. As a result, I give it 5 points for playability. But what about the authenticity? This is where the crane falls apart for most people, since the booms are way too short relative to the massive chassis. However, keep in mind that the boom is already massive and it's already a pain to transport. It can easily take up the entire interior of your car, so if it were any taller, you'd have to disassemble it for transportation. However, just imagine a crane that's 5 meters tall or even more. That would truly be a sight to behold. If this set were unlicensed, the authenticity would easily be 5 points. However, because of that Liber LR13000 license, I can only give it 3 points for authenticity. Now for the value, which I think is much better than the popular opinion. Some people would give it 0 points because it contains less than 3,000 pieces while retailing for a whopping $700. However, there are absolutely a ton of frames used for the chassis, superstructure, and the booms. You absolutely have to build the crane yourself in order to realize just how many frames there are. It did not feel like Technic when building, but rather an entirely new building system. If there were no frames used, I'm confident that the piece count would be over 6,000. So, in reality, the value isn't that bad, especially considering the size. As a result, I give it 3.5 points for value, which brings us to a total of 16.5. According to the point system, the winner is the 2015 crane, followed closely by the 2006 red crane, the 2012 tiny one, and finally the Liber crane. My personal opinion strongly differs from this ranking. I personally would place the brand new Liber on top, followed by the 2015 crane, then the red crane, and then the tiny one. If you would like to learn more about the brand new LEGO Technic Liber crawler crane LR13000, then click on the video right over here. This is your Unbrick Me here, and I'll see you in the next one.